I'm Sarah Mitchell, 32, a single mother who spent years being the family disappointment. For as long as I can remember, my parents' voices carried that particular tone of resignation whenever they spoke about me, the daughter who dropped out of law school, who got pregnant at 24, who couldn't seem to get her life together according to their standards. "We're ashamed of you," my mother said the last time we spoke, her words cutting deeper than any physical wound ever could. But here's what they didn't know. While they were busy broadcasting their disappointment to anyone who would listen, I was quietly building something extraordinary. And when my 5-year-old daughter Emma won the state championship for young mathematicians, suddenly their tune changed completely. Now they can't stop bragging to their friends about their brilliant granddaughter, the same child they barely acknowledged existed. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they were ashamed of had raised the granddaughter they now claimed as their greatest pride. The photograph sits on my kitchen counter, a painful reminder of how invisible I'd become in my own family. Christmas 2019, the last time we were all together. In the picture, my parents beam with pride as they stand behind my sister Rebecca, their arms wrapped around her shoulders. Rebecca, with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer dress, holds her latest achievement, a partnership offer from the city's most prestigious law firm. I'm there too, barely visible on the edge of the frame, holding a then 3-year-old. Emma. My parents' body language tells the whole story. They're angled away from us, as if we're an afterthought someone insisted on including. Emma's little hand reaches toward her grandparents, but they don't notice. They never noticed. Growing up, the hierarchy in our house was crystal clear. Rebecca was the golden child, straight A's, varsity tennis, student council president, early acceptance to Harvard. I was the one who struggled with math, who preferred art class to debate team, who asked too many questions and never seemed to have the right answers. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became my mother's favorite refrain. When Rebecca graduated summa cum laude, they threw a party for 50 people. When I finally finished my associate degree in graphic design while working 2 jobs and caring for Emma, they forgot to even acknowledge it. Rebecca knew her position in the family hierarchy and wasn't shy about leveraging it. She'd call our parents every Sunday, regaling them with stories of her courtroom victories and networking events. I'd hear my mother's voice light up during those conversations, the same voice that grew tired and distant when I called. "Sarah just doesn't have Rebecca's drive," I once overheard my father telling his brother. "Some people are born to achieve, others to struggle." The irony wasn't lost on me that while Rebecca was climbing corporate ladders, I was the one who had created something truly extraordinary, a human being with unlimited potential. But achievement in our family was measured in dollar signs and social status, not in love, sacrifice, or the quiet victories of single motherhood. Rebecca's success was loud and public. Mine was quiet and personal. She had accolades and awards. I had Emma's first words, her first steps, her first mathematical equation solved at age 4. She had corner offices and client dinners. I had bedtime stories and scraped knees and the pure joy of watching my daughter discover the world. But in our family's eyes, only one type of success counted. And it wasn't mine. Even now, looking at that photograph, I can feel the familiar ache of being the daughter who never quite measured up. The one whose love came with conditions, whose presence was tolerated rather than celebrated. Rebecca had earned her place at the center of family photos and family pride. I had earned mine at the margins. What they didn't understand, what they still don't understand, is that being pushed to the margins taught me something Rebecca never learned. How to find my worth from within, how to love unconditionally, and how to create beauty and meaning even when the world tells you you're not. Enough that those lessons, painful as they were to learn, became the foundation of how I raised Emma. She would never doubt her worth. She would never feel invisible in her own family. She would know every single day that she was loved not for what she achieved, But for who she was, the ultrasound photo is tucked away in my jewelry box now, but I remember staring at it for hours that October afternoon in 2020, that grainy black and white image of Emma at 12 weeks, a tiny miracle that would divide my family forever. I was 24, barely scraping by on my graphic design freelance work, and definitely not ready to be a mother by anyone's standards. Least of all my parents. When I called to tell them, the silence on the other end of the phone stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "Sarah," my mother finally said, her voice carrying that particular tone of disappointment I knew so well. "Please tell me, you're not serious." I was calling Ryan, Emma's father, every day back then, hoping he'd changed his mind about wanting to be part of this. He hadn't. The man who'd promised me the world during our 6-month relationship vanished the moment I said the word pregnant. His exact words were, "This isn't part of my plan right now." My parents' reaction was worse than his abandonment. At least Ryan was honest about his selfishness. My parents wrapped their rejection in concern and practicality. "You can't possibly think you're ready for this responsibility," my father said during the family meeting they called, though it felt more like an intervention. "You don't have stable income, you're living in that tiny apartment, you haven't even figured out your own life yet." Rebecca sat silently through most of it, occasionally nodding at our parents' points. When she finally spoke, her words cut deeper than anything else. "Maybe this is a sign that you need to make some mature decisions for once." They presented their solution like a business proposal. There was a couple they knew, friends of friends, who'd been trying to have children for years. Professional, stable, financially secure. "Think about what's best for the baby," my mother urged. "Think about giving this child the opportunities you can't provide." I held that ultrasound photo during every one of these conversations, looking at the tiny profile, the perfect little nose, the hands that seemed to be reaching out. This wasn't just a baby to me, this was my daughter. I could feel it in my bones, the way other mothers described. She was already mine. "I'm keeping her," I said finally, during what would be our last family dinner for 3 years. "I don't care what you think is practical or reasonable. This is my child, and I'm keeping her." The look that passed between my parents spoke volumes. It was the look of people watching someone make what they considered the biggest mistake of their life. It was also the look of people deciding to step back and let that mistake happen. "Well," my father said, cutting his steak with deliberate precision, "don't expect us to enable this decision. If you're determined to throw your life away, you'll do it without our financial support." My mother added, "We won't be able to help with babysitting either. We have our own lives to live." Rebecca chimed in with false concern. "I just hope you realize what you're giving up. Your whole future, basically." But they were wrong about what I was giving up. Yes, I was giving up their approval, something I'd been chasing my entire life. Yes, I was giving up the safety net I'd always assumed would be there. Yes, I was giving up the conventional path that might have eventually earned me a place in family photos and family pride. What I was gaining, though, was everything. I was gaining the chance to love someone completely and unconditionally. I was gaining the opportunity to create the kind of family I'd always wished. I'd had one where our worth wasn't measured by achievements or mistakes, but by the simple fact of belonging. That ultrasound photo represented the moment. I stopped trying to be the daughter my parents wanted and started becoming the mother my child deserved. It was the moment I chose love over approval, hope over fear, and possibility over the safe, narrow path they'd mapped out for acceptable living. Emma kicked for the first time 2 weeks after that dinner. I was sitting alone in my apartment, hand on my belly, when I felt that flutter of movement. It was like she was telling me we were going to be okay, just the two of us, building something beautiful together. Emma's first drawing of me hangs on our refrigerator, slightly faded now, but still my most treasured piece of art. In crayon, she'd captured me with wild brown hair, a huge smile, and arms stretched wide enough to hold the world. At the bottom, in her careful 5-year-old handwriting, my mommy is the best mommy ever. No art gallery could hold anything more precious. The early years were a blur of sleepless nights, freelance deadlines, and the constant juggling act of single motherhood. While other new mothers had support systems, partners, parents, extended family, I had carved out our own little world in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chun's bakery. Mrs. Chun became our first angel. This tiny woman with silver hair and knowing eyes would appear at my door with soup when Emma was teething, or offer to watch her for an hour when I had client meetings. Strong mothers raise strong children, she'd say in her accented English, patting my hand when I'd break down from exhaustion. The financial struggles were real. Some months, I chose between buying Emma new shoes or paying the electric bill on time. I learned to shop at thrift stores and make meals that could stretch for days. I discovered which parks had the best free activities and which library programs would keep a curious toddler engaged while I worked on my laptop in the corner. But Emma never knew we were poor. To her, we were rich in adventures. We had picnics on our living room floor when it was too cold for the park. We made art from cardboard boxes and painted pictures with watercolors I'd stretch by adding more water. We read every book the library had twice, doing different voices for each character. She was walking by 10 months, talking in full sentences by 18 months, and asking questions I had to Google by age 2. Mommy, why is the sky blue? Mommy, how do numbers go on forever? Mommy, what makes flowers know when to grow? Her intelligence wasn't just academic, it was emotional too. When I'd have particularly hard days, missing deadline after deadline because she was sick or I was overwhelmed, she'd crawl into my lap with her favorite stuffed rabbit and say, "It's okay, Mommy. Tomorrow will be better." She was 3 when I first noticed her mathematical abilities. While other kids her age were learning to count to 10, Emma was doing addition in her head. I'd find her arranging her blocks in complex patterns, creating sequences that followed mathematical logic I couldn't immediately understand. "Look, Mommy," she'd say, pointing to her latest creation. "If I add 2 more here and take away 1 there, they match perfectly." I started checking out advanced math books from the library, sitting with her at our kitchen table as she absorbed concepts that should have been years beyond her comprehension. She'd work through problems with the focused intensity of a scholar, her little tongue poking out in concentration. The other mothers at the playground started to notice too. "Emma is so advanced," they'd say, with that mixture of admiration and concern that comes when a child stands out too much. "Are you putting pressure on her to achieve?" The irony was that I was trying to do the opposite of what my parents had done, where they had demanded achievement and withheld love when I didn't measure up. I was giving Emma unconditional love while she naturally excelled. I never pushed her toward mathematics. She gravitated toward it like iron to a magnet. By age 4, she was solving problems that stumped me. I found myself taking pictures of her work to show to the librarian, Ms. Rodriguez, who had a degree in education. "This is extraordinary, Sarah," she'd whisper, not wanting to make Emma self-conscious. "You might want to consider having her evaluated for gifted programs." But Emma's greatest gift wasn't her brilliant mind, it was her heart. She'd save half her cookie to share with me. She'd make elaborate cards for my birthday, writing "I love you" in numbers and equations. When I cried, and there were many nights, I cried from exhaustion and loneliness, she'd stroke my hair and sing the lullabies I sang to her. Those years taught me that family isn't about blood or approval or meeting someone else's expectations. Family is about showing up every day, about choosing love even when it's hard, about creating a safe space where someone can grow into their full potential. My parents had provided material security, but emotional scarcity. I was providing the opposite. We might have been financially stretched, but emotionally we were abundant. Emma never doubted she was loved, never questioned her worth, never felt like she had to earn her place in our family of two. Watching her grow, seeing her confidence and curiosity flourish, I realized something profound. The greatest gift I could give her wasn't perfect grades or achievements. It was the unshakable knowledge that she was worthy of love simply because she existed. Everything else, including her remarkable mind, was just beautiful addition to that foundation. The advanced math workbook sits on Emma's shelf now, its pages worn from countless hours of use. I remember the day I bought it, standing in the educational supply store while Emma, then 4 years old, had already flipped through 3 grade-level appropriate books and pronounced them too easy. "Mommy," she'd said, tugging on my sleeve, "can we get this one instead?" She was pointing to a workbook labeled Advanced Mathematics for Grades 3 to 5. The store clerk gave me a skeptical look. "Are you sure? This might be a bit challenging for—" "She's advanced," I interrupted, not wanting to make a scene, but also not wanting to doubt my daughter's abilities. I've learned to trust Emma's assessment of her own capabilities. At home that evening, I watched her work through problems that would have challenged me in middle school. She approached each equation with a methodical precision that was both fascinating and slightly unnerving. Where other children her age played with dolls or building blocks, Emma played with numbers. But it wasn't just the calculations, it was the way she saw patterns everywhere. She'd noticed that the flowers in our window box grew in Fibonacci sequences. She'd point out geometric shapes in architecture during our walks. She'd organize her crayons by color gradients that followed mathematical principles I'd never considered. "Look, Mommy," she said one morning, arranging her cereal pieces on the table. "If I eat them in this order, I can make the numbers balance perfectly." I started documenting her work, not out of any grand plan, but because I wanted to remember these moments. Photos of her equations, videos of her explaining complex concepts in her matter-of-fact, 5-year-old voice, notebooks filled with her mathematical explorations. The financial sacrifice to nurture her gift was significant. Advanced math books weren't cheap, and the educational software she needed was beyond our budget. I started taking on extra freelance projects, working late into the night after she was asleep to afford the materials that fed her. Curious mind. There were weeks when I lived on peanut butter sandwiches, so I could buy her the math competition prep books she'd requested. Weeks when I postponed paying bills to afford the online course that would challenge her at the appropriate level. Each sacrifice felt like an investment in her future, in her right to reach her full potential. Mrs. Chan noticed the change in our routine. "You work too hard," she'd say, seeing me at my laptop at midnight. "The little one, she is special, yes? But you must take care of yourself too." She was right, but I couldn't help myself. Watching Emma's mind work was like witnessing a miracle every day. She'd approach problems with a creativity that amazed her online tutors. Where other students followed formulas, she'd find elegant shortcuts. Where others memorized patterns, she'd discover underlying principles. Her first real recognition came from an online math forum for gifted children. She'd submitted a solution to a problem that had stumped many older students, and her approach was so innovative that it got featured in their newsletter. I printed out that newsletter and kept it in my wallet, pulling it out whenever I doubted whether I was doing enough for her. But the most meaningful recognition came from Emma herself. One evening, as we worked through her latest mathematical challenge together, she looked up at me with those serious dark eyes. "Mommy," she said, "I know we don't have as much money as some families, but we have something better." "What's that, sweetheart?" "We have time. You always have time to help me learn new things. And you never make me feel bad when I ask questions." That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at our kitchen table surrounded by her math workbooks and my freelance projects, and I understood something important. My parents had measured worth by external achievements, degrees, jobs, social status. But Emma was teaching me that the most valuable thing I could give her wasn't expensive educational materials or prestigious programs. It was my attention, my belief in her abilities, my willingness to sacrifice for her dreams without making those sacrifices feel like burdens she had to carry. She was already showing signs of mathematical genius at age 5, but more importantly, she was growing up knowing she was supported, valued, and loved for who she was, not just for what she could achieve. The workbook on her shelf represents more than academic progress. It represents a mother's dedication to nurturing her child's gifts, even when the world around them doesn't understand or appreciate the magnitude of what's being cultivated in a small apartment above a bakery. The championship certificate hangs framed in our living room now, but I still remember every detail of that extraordinary Saturday in March. Emma, just 5 years old, sitting at a desk that seemed enormous compared to her small frame, competing against children twice her age in the state mathematics championship for young scholars. I'd almost talked myself out of entering her. The registration fee was steep for our budget, and I worried about putting too much pressure on her shoulders. But when I mentioned the competition casually, her eyes lit up with the kind of excitement other kids reserved for trips to the amusement park. "Please, Mommy," she'd said, bouncing on her toes. "I want to try. I promise I'll do my best." The morning of the competition, I was more nervous than she was. My hands shook as I braided her hair, and I kept checking our bag to make sure we had extra pencils, her lucky rabbit's foot keychain, and the granola bars she liked. Emma, meanwhile, was calm as still water. She ate her breakfast methodically, reviewed her notes quietly, and when I asked if she was scared, she looked at me with that serious expression that made her seem much older than her years. "I'm not scared, Mommy. Numbers don't lie, and I know numbers." The competition venue was intimidating, a large university auditorium filled with children from across the state and their families. I noticed immediately that we were different from most of the other participants. The other families had that polished look of private school education and professional achievement. Fathers in expensive suits, mothers with perfect manicures, older siblings who'd probably won competitions themselves. Emma and I, in our carefully chosen but clearly budget-conscious outfits, stood out like dandelions in a rose garden. I saw some of the other parents glance at us with barely concealed skepticism. A 5-year-old in a competition designed for ages 6 to 12? From a single mother who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else? But Emma was oblivious to the social dynamics. She was studying the other competitors with genuine curiosity, not intimidation. When a boy twice her age boasted loudly about his private math tutor and advanced placement classes, Emma simply smiled and asked him what his favorite type of equation was. The first round eliminated half the competitors. I watched from the parent viewing area, my heart hammering as Emma worked through problems with methodical precision. While other children rushed or second-guessed themselves, she took her time, double-checking each answer with the patience of someone much older. When they announced that she'd advanced to the semifinals, I had to bite my lip to keep from cheering out loud. The other parents were beginning to notice her now, this tiny girl who was quietly outperforming children with years more education and resources. The semifinal round was brutal. Complex word problems that required not just mathematical skill, but logical reasoning and creative thinking. I watched Emma read each question twice, her lips moving slightly as she worked through the logic, then attacked the calculations with focused intensity. She finished with 10 minutes to spare and used the extra time to review her work. When they called time, she set down her pencil calmly and looked over at me. I gave her a thumbs up, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The wait for results felt eternal. Emma and I sat together in the cafeteria, sharing a sandwich and talking about everything except the competition. She seemed more interested in the geometric patterns of the floor tiles than in whether she'd won or lost. When they called the finalists, the Top 5 competitors who would move on to the championship round, Emma's name was third on the list. The auditorium erupted in polite applause, but I heard a few murmurs of surprise. She was by far the youngest finalist and clearly the least conventionally prepared. The final round was a single problem, complex enough that adult mathematicians might struggle with it. The competitors had 1 hour to show their work and arrive at the correct answer. I watched Emma read the problem, then close her eyes for a moment, something she did. When she was thinking through particularly challenging concepts, then she began to work. Her approach was different from the other competitors. Where they used conventional methods taught in advanced programs, she found elegant shortcuts, creative solutions that cut through complexity with startling simplicity. With 15 minutes remaining, she raised her hand. The proctor looked surprised. No one had ever finished that quickly in the history of the competition. Emma calmly handed in her work and returned to her seat. The judges took 30 minutes to review all the submissions. When they returned to announce the winner, the head judge looked directly at Emma. This year's state mathematics champion, with a perfect score and the most innovative solution we've ever seen, is Emma Mitchell, age 5, from Lincoln Elementary. The auditorium fell silent for a moment before erupting in applause. Emma looked at me with pure joy, not pride or smugness, just happiness at having solved a beautiful problem successfully. As I watched her accept that trophy almost as tall as she was, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about mathematics or competitions or recognition. This was about a little girl who'd been nurtured to reach her full potential, who'd been loved unconditionally, who'd been given the confidence to trust her own brilliant mind. The other parents approached us afterward, full of questions and congratulations. Some seemed genuinely impressed, others perhaps a bit threatened by what they'd witnessed. But Emma handled all the attention with the same calm grace she'd shown during the competition. Driving home that evening, trophy secured in the back seat, Emma fell asleep with her medal still around her neck. I kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, this extraordinary little person who'd just achieved something remarkable, while maintaining her essential sweetness and humility. That championship changed everything for us. Not because of the recognition or the trophy, but because it proved something I'd known in my heart all along. With enough love, support, and belief, a child can achieve miracles. The daughter my parents had dismissed as a burden had raised a child who was destined for greatness. My old phone still shows the call history from that Tuesday evening and April 7 missed calls from my mother, 4 from my father, and 3 from Rebecca. After 3 years of virtual silence, the sudden flood of communication felt surreal. I was giving Emma her bath when the first call came through. She was showing me how she could make different geometric shapes with her bath bubbles, completely absorbed in her mathematical play when my phone started buzzing on the bathroom counter. "Mommy, your phone is singing," Emma observed, not looking up from her bubble equations. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach drop. Mom flashed across the display. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail like I had with their previous sporadic attempts at contact over the years. But something about the persistence, the way the calls kept coming, made me curious. By the time I got Emma out of the bath, dried, and in her pajamas, there were 4 new voicemails waiting. I tucked her into bed with her favorite book and stepped into the hallway to listen. The first message was my mother's voice, tighter and more formal than I remembered. "Sarah, this is your mother. We need to talk. Please call back as soon as you get this." The second was my father. "Sarah, we heard about Emma's achievement. We'd like to discuss this as a family. Call us." The third was Rebecca, sounding almost breathless. "Sarah, oh my God, Emma won the state championship. Why didn't you tell us?" "We had to hear it from Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store. Call me back." I stared at the phone, trying to process what I was hearing. Mrs. Patterson, my mother's bridge partner and neighborhood gossip coordinator, Of course, that's how they'd found out. The local paper had run a small story about Emma's victory, complete with a photo of her holding the trophy. In a town our size, news traveled fast. I called my mother back, my heart hammering as the phone rang. Sarah. Her voice was careful, controlled. We need to talk. Hello to you too, Mom. Don't be sarcastic. This is important. We heard about Emma's, about what she accomplished. The mathematics competition. I waited, unsure how to respond. For 3 years, they'd shown no interest in Emma's development, her achievements, or even her existence. Now, suddenly, they wanted to talk. We were wondering, my mother continued, if we could see her. It's been too long since we've been part of her life. The word too caught in my throat. Too long? They'd chosen not to be part of her life. They'd made their position clear when I was pregnant, and they'd maintained that distance through every milestone, every birthday, every achievement until now. We'd like to have her for dinner on Sunday. My father's voice came through. Apparently, I was on speakerphone. And perhaps we could discuss how we might support her education going forward. A child with her gifts deserves the best opportunities. I found myself speechless. The same people who told me I was throwing my life away by keeping Emma were now interested in supporting her education. The same parents who dismissed my parenting abilities were now eager to be involved. I need to think about this, I managed finally. What's to think about? Rebecca had apparently joined the call. She's their granddaughter. They have a right to know her. Rights, the word stung. Where had their rights been when Emma was learning to walk, to talk, to read? Where had their rights been during the sleepless nights of teething, the emergency room visits for ear infections, the daily challenges of single motherhood? I'll call you back, I said, ending the conversation before I said something I might regret. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at Emma's artwork on the refrigerator, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The championship trophy sat on our counter, catching the light from the overhead bulb, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't about Emma, not really. This was about them. About how it looked to their social circle that their brilliant granddaughter, the state mathematics champion, was being raised by the daughter they'd written off. About how Mrs. Patterson and the other bridge club ladies would whisper about the Mitchell family dynamics. Emma appeared in the doorway, dragging her stuffed rabbit. Mommy, you look sad. Are you okay? I pulled her onto my lap, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. I'm okay, sweetheart. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff. Was that Grandma and Grandpa on the phone? She asked, and my heart clenched. She knew they existed. I'd never hidden that from her, but she'd never really known them. Double quotes, yes, it was. Do they want to meet me? The hope in her voice was almost unbearable. Despite everything, despite their absence from her life, she still carried that natural child's curiosity about family, about belonging to something bigger than just the two of us. Maybe, I said carefully. Would you like that? She nodded eagerly. I could show them my trophy and my math books. Do you think they'd be proud of me? That question broke something open in my chest. Of course she wanted their approval, their pride. Every child wants to be celebrated by their grandparents. But I also knew the cost of seeking approval from people who gave it conditionally, who withheld love based on performance. Looking at those missed calls on my phone, I realized I was facing a choice that would define not just my future, but Emma's. Could I trust the parents who'd failed me not to fail her? Could I believe that their sudden interest was genuine, or was it just another form of the conditional love I'd grown up with? Emma deserved to know her grandparents, but she also deserved to be protected from the kind of emotional manipulation that had shaped my own childhood. The question was, could I manage both? Rebecca's law firm business card sits in my wallet now, a reminder of the moment I realized nothing had really changed. She'd handed it to me with that same condescending smile she'd perfected in childhood, the one that said she was still the Successful sister, and I was still the disappointment despite everything. The family dinner was scheduled for Sunday at 2 p.m. Exactly 3 years and 4 months since our last gathering. Emma spent the morning asking questions about her grandparents, trying on different dresses to make the best impression, practicing how she'd explain her mathematical theories to them. What if they don't understand my work? She worried, clutching her favorite math book. Then you'll explain it in a way they can understand, I assured her. Though I wasn't entirely sure my parents would make the effort to listen, the house looked exactly the same manicured lawn. Perfect landscaping, the kind of suburban respectability my parents had always prized. Emma's hand tightened in mine as we walked up the familiar path, and I wondered if she could sense my anxiety. My mother opened the door before we could knock, and I saw her expression change the moment she laid eyes on Emma. The polite smile became something more genuine, warmer. For a moment, I felt a flutter of hope. "Emma," she said, kneeling to my daughter's level, "look how beautiful you are." "And so grown up." Emma beamed, offering a shy smile. "Hi, Grandma. I brought my trophy to show you." "I can't wait to see it." "Sweetheart." The transformation was immediate and startling. The woman who'd been cold and distant with me for years melted into the kind of grandmother I'd always imagined her becoming. She ushered Emma into the living room, asking about her favorite subjects, her friends, her interests. My father emerged from his study, and I watched the same metamorphosis occur. His face soft as Emma carefully explained her mathematical processes, showing him the trophy that was nearly as tall as she was. "Remarkable," he kept saying. "Absolutely remarkable." Rebecca arrived 20 minutes later, making her entrance with the kind of dramatic flair she'd perfected in high school. Designer heels clicked across the hardwood floors, and she air-kissed our parents before turning her attention to Emma. "So you're the little genius we've been hearing about," she said, but her tone was warm, genuine. "I'm your Aunt Rebecca. I've been looking forward to meeting you." Emma, naturally social and curious, responded to all the attention with delight. She demonstrated her mathematical theories using the salt and pepper shakers, explained her competition strategy, and charmed everyone with her articulate explanations of complex concepts. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice the subtle dynamics that felt painfully familiar. Every conversation centered around Emma's achievements. Every question focused on her intellectual gifts. Every expression of pride was tied to her performance. "We should get her into the Riverside Academy," my mother said, mentioning the elite private school where Rebecca had thrived. "A mind like hers needs proper cultivation." "I know someone on the board," my father added. "I could make some calls." "And there are summer programs at the university," Rebecca chimed in, pulling out her business card. "I have connections there too. This is what I do. I make things happen for people." I watched Emma absorb all this attention, this sudden flood of family interest and support. She was glowing, clearly thrilled to be the center of their universe. But something felt wrong, artificial, like watching actors perform roles they'd rehearsed. "What about Sarah?" I finally asked during a lull in the Emma-focused conversation. "Don't you want to know how she's been? What she's accomplished as a single mother?" The silence that followed was telling. My parents exchanged glances, and Rebecca suddenly found her wine glass fascinating. "Of course we're proud of Sarah," my mother said finally, but her voice lacked the warmth it had carried when speaking to Emma. "It's just that Emma's achievement is so extraordinary." "Sarah's done well," my father added with the kind of diplomatic tone he used for unpleasant but necessary conversations. Considering the circumstances. As if raising a mathematical prodigy while working multiple jobs and receiving no family support was somehow less impressive than Emma's natural brilliance. Emma, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents, continued chattering about her mathematical discoveries. My parents hung on every word, asking follow-up questions, encouraging her to elaborate. It was the kind of engaged attention I'd craved as a child, but never received. No, my mother said. We have a trust fund that's been sitting unused. We could redirect it toward Emma's education. Really? Emma's eyes lit up. That's so nice of you. I felt a chill of recognition. The same conditional generosity they'd always offered love and support, tied to achievement, approval contingent, on meeting their standards. We should also introduce her to the Hendersons' grandson, Rebecca suggested. He's 8, but he's in the gifted program at Riverside. Emma needs to be around her intellectual peers. They were already planning Emma's life, mapping out her future based on 2 hours of acquaintance. The speed with which they'd inserted themselves into our world was breathtaking and unsettling. During dessert, Emma excused herself to use the bathroom, and the mask slipped slightly. She's obviously brilliant, my mother said, but has she been properly socialized? She seems very, very what? I interrupted. Confident, my father finished diplomatically. Perhaps too confident for her own good. She needs structure, Rebecca added, discipline. The kind of environment that will challenge her appropriately. I realized they were critiquing my parenting, suggesting that Emma's confidence, the very quality I was most proud of nurturing, was somehow problematic. She's perfectly socialized, I said firmly. She's happy, healthy, and well-adjusted. Of course, my mother said quickly. We're just thinking about what's best for her future. When Emma returned, the conversation immediately brightened again. More questions about her mathematical interests, more praise for her achievements, more plans for her advancement. I watched my daughter bask in their attention, and my heart broke a little dot as we prepared to leave. My parents walked us to the door with Emma between them, each holding one of her hands. We'd love to have you over again next Sunday, my mother said to Emma, just you and us. We could work on some advanced problems together. That sounds wonderful. Emma said, then looked at me. Can I, Mommy? The expectation in her voice, the hope in her eyes, how could I explain that her grandparents' love came with strings attached? How could I tell her that their sudden interest felt more like acquisition than affection? We'll see, I said, the phrase every parent uses when they need time to think. Driving home, Emma chattered excitedly about her grandparents, her new aunt, all the opportunities they'd mentioned. They're so nice, Mommy. And they understand my math problems. Can we see them again soon? I listened to her enthusiasm and felt the weight of an impossible choice. Emma deserved to know her family, to experience their love and support, but I also knew the price of that love, the way it could evaporate the moment she failed to meet their expectations. That night, after Emma had gone to sleep, I sat in our small living room looking at Rebecca's business card. On the surface, it represented connections, opportunities, the kind of advantages I could never provide alone. But it also represented a world where worth was measured by achievement, where love was conditional, where a 5-year-old's confidence could be seen as a flaw that needed correction. The reunion had shown me that my parents could love Emma, but only the version of Emma that reflected well on them. The mathematician, the prodigy, the granddaughter they could brag about to their friends. What would happen when she had bad days, made mistakes, or simply wanted to be a normal child? I'd spent 3 years protecting Emma from the conditional love that had shaped my childhood. Now I had to decide whether the benefits of family connection outweighed the risks of emotional manipulation. The choice felt impossible, but Emma's future depended on getting it right. The local newspaper article about Emma sits in a scrapbook now, but at the time it felt like a double-edged sword. Local 5-year-old wins state mathematics championship, read the headline, accompanied by a photo of Emma holding her trophy, with that radiant smile that could light up any room dot within a week of the article's publication. I started hearing about my parents' newfound enthusiasm for their granddaughter through the neighborhood grapevine. Mrs. Chen was the first to mention. Her eyebrows raised with amused curiosity. Your mother, she said, she came into the bakery yesterday, bought 6 dozen cookies for her book club, spent 20 minutes telling everyone about Emma's mathematics prize. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, my mother had barely acknowledged Emma's existence. Now she was carrying copies of the newspaper article in her purse. APPARENTL. Why, Mrs. Patterson confirmed it when I ran into her at the grocery store. Your mother is just glowing these days, she said with that knowing smile that suggested she understood the family dynamics better than she let on. She can't stop talking about that brilliant granddaughter of hers. Shows everyone the newspaper clipping. The most telling encounter came through my former coworker, Jessica, who happened to be at the same restaurant as my parents the previous Friday. Sarah, she texted me, I couldn't help but overhear your parents at dinner last night. They spent the entire meal telling the couple at the next table about Emma's achievements. Your mom had photos on her phone and everything. Photos on her phone. My mother, who had never asked to see pictures of Emma, now apparently carried them everywhere. The transformation was stunning in its completeness and disturbing in its implications. I started noticing the pattern everywhere. Emma and I would be at the park, and mothers I barely knew would approach me with comments like, I heard from so-and-so that Emma's grandparents are just so proud of her achievements. Always the grandparents' pride, never acknowledgement of my role in nurturing those achievements. The most uncomfortable encounter happened at the library, where Ms. Rodriguez pulled me aside during one of Emma's advanced math sessions. I don't know if this is my place, she said carefully, but your mother was here earlier this week. She was asking about Emma's reading level, her mathematical progression, whether we had any documentation of her achievements. Documentation? She seemed very interested in having records of Emma's intellectual development. She mentioned something about applications to specialized programs. I felt a chill of recognition. My parents were building a case, collecting evidence of Emma's brilliance, as if they were preparing for some kind of custody argument or academic application. But they were doing it without consulting me, without acknowledging that I'd been documenting and nurturing Emma's gifts for years. The worst part was watching Emma's reaction to all this sudden attention. She started asking questions about her grandparents with increasing frequency. Mommy, why didn't Grandma and Grandpa want to see me before I won the contest? The question hit like a physical blow. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that some people only love you when you make them look good? Sometimes adults make mistakes, I said carefully. Sometimes they don't realize how special someone is until other people point it out. But Emma was too smart to be satisfied with such a vague answer. Did they think I wasn't smart before? I could see her processing the timeline, trying to understand why her mathematical abilities had suddenly made her worthy of their attention. The realization that love could be conditional was too advanced a concept for a 5-year-old. But Emma was already grasping its edges. The final straw came when Rebecca called to invite Emma to a dinner party she was hosting for her law firm. Colleagues, I'd love for them to meet Emma, she said. She'd be such an inspiration to everyone. An inspiration, a show pony, a way for Rebecca to demonstrate that brilliance ran in the Mitchell family, even if it had skipped her sister. Emma's not a performing seal, I said, probably more sharply than necessary. Of course not, Rebecca replied smoothly. I just thought she might enjoy meeting some successful professionals. Role models, but I knew what she really meant. She wanted to parade Emma in front of her colleagues, to bask in reflected glory, to claim credit for a brilliant niece she'd never bothered to know until the newspaper made Emma's achievements public. That evening, I sat Emma down for a conversation I'd been dreading. Sweetheart, I said, how do you feel about all this attention from Grandma, Grandpa, and Aunt Rebecca? Emma considered the question seriously. It's nice that they're proud of me. But She paused, searching for the right words. It feels like they only like the math part of me. Even at 5 years old, she could sense what I'd taken years to articulate. They loved her achievements, not her. They were proud of her performance, not her person. Do you think they would still like me if I wasn't good at math? She asked. The question broke my heart because I couldn't honestly answer yes. My parents had shown me exactly how their love worked: conditional, performance-based, tied to achievements that reflected well on them. I will always love you no matter what, I said firmly. Math or no math, trophies or no trophies, you are perfect just as you are. She smiled and hugged me, but I could see the wheels turning in her brilliant little mind. She was beginning to understand that not all love was created equal, and that some people's affection came with invisible price tags. Watching my parents parade Emma around their social circles, I realized they were making the same mistake they'd made with me, treating a child like an accessory to their own self-image rather than a person worthy of unconditional love. The only difference was that Emma was meeting their standards in ways I never had. But standards change, expectations escalate, and I knew from bitter experience that the higher they lifted her, the farther she could fall if she ever failed to live up to their image of the perfect granddaughter. Emma's school photo from that spring sits on my nightstand, a reminder of innocence in the midst of family chaos. In it, she's wearing the blue dress we picked out together, her hair in 2 neat braids, and that genuine smile that had nothing to do with achievements or expectations. It was just Emma being Emma. I kept that photo close during the weeks when I was wrestling with the most important decision of my parenting life. My parents had extended invitation after invitation, each one more elaborate than the last. Weekend trips to the science museum, dinner at expensive restaurants, shopping expeditions for appropriate clothes for their brilliant granddaughter. Emma was thriving under all the attention, but I was watching carefully for signs of the damage I recognized from my own childhood. The way she started asking if her math problems were good enough before showing them to me. The way she began talking about herself in terms of her achievements rather than her feelings or interests. "Mommy," she said one evening as I tucked her into bed, "am I the smartest person in our family now?" The question revealed everything. She was beginning to define herself through comparison, through ranking, through the kind of competitive framework that had poisoned my relationship with Rebecca for years. "Sweetheart," I said, sitting on the edge of her bed, "being smart is just one part of who you are. What makes you special isn't your math skills, it's your kindness, your curiosity, your sense of humor, the way you care about other people." But I could see the confusion in her eyes. Why were her grandparents only interested in the math part? Why did every conversation with them center around her intellectual achievements? That weekend, I made a decision that would define our future. Instead of accepting another invitation to showcase Emma to my parents' social circle, I took her on one of our old adventures: a picnic in the park, followed by a trip to the Children's Museum where she could explore without pressure or performance. Expectations. We spread our blanket under the oak tree where we'd had dozens of picnics over the years. Emma played with dandelions, making patterns with their seeds, but her mathematical observations were mixed with pure childhood wonder about how they floated on the breeze. "Mommy," she said, lying on her back and looking up at the clouds, "I like it when it's just us. No one asks me to solve problems or show how smart I am." The relief in her voice was unmistakable. At 5 years old, she was already feeling the weight of others' expectations, the pressure to perform rather than simply exist. "You never have to perform for anyone," I told her firmly. "Not for me, not for your grandparents, not for anyone. You're enough exactly as you are." We spent the afternoon doing normal 5-year-old things. She chased butterflies, collected interesting rocks, and asked questions about everything from why grass is green to why some people have different colored skin. Her curiosity was boundless, but it wasn't performance-driven. It was pure exploration, pure joy and discovery dot at the Children's Museum. I watched her play in the water table alongside children of all ages and abilities. She helped a younger boy figure out how the water wheels worked, not by showing off her superior understanding, but by patiently guiding his hands to help him discover it himself. That's when I understood the fundamental difference between the love I was giving Emma and the love my parents were offering. My love was unconditional. It existed whether she solved equations or played with toys, whether she won competitions or had ordinary days. Their love was transactional, tied to her ability to make them look good, to validate their family's intellectual superiority. True love accepts the whole person. Conditional love only accepts the parts that serve the lover's needs. That evening, I called my mother to decline their standing Sunday dinner invitation. "We need to establish some boundaries," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Boundaries?" My mother's tone sharpened. "What are you talking about?" "Emma is 5 years old. She needs to be a child, not a showcase for the family's intelligence. If you want to be part of her life, it has to be because you love her as a person, not because you're proud of her achievements." The silence on the other end was telling. "Sarah," my father's voice came through. Apparently, I was on speaker again. "We're proud of her. What's wrong with that?" "Nothing's wrong with being proud." "But where were you when she was learning to walk? When she had nightmares? When she was sick with the flu? You can't just show up for the victories and ignore everything else." "We're trying to make up for lost time," my mother said defensively. "No," I replied, finally understanding the truth I'd been circling for weeks. "You're trying to claim credit for something you had no part in creating. Emma's brilliance didn't happen because of your genes or your influence. It happened because she was loved unconditionally, supported consistently, and given the safety to explore her world without fear of disappointing anyone." Rebecca's voice joined the call. "You're being ridiculous, Sarah. They want to help Emma reach her potential. Emma is already reaching her potential. She doesn't need to be managed or directed or turned into someone's trophy. She needs to be loved for who she is, not what she can do." After I hung up, Emma appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of my raised voice. "Were you talking to Grandma and Grandpa?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart. Are they mad at us?" I pulled her onto my lap. This extraordinary little person who had taught me more about love than anyone else in my life. "Sometimes people show love in different ways," I said carefully. "Some people love you for what you do. Other people love you for who you are. The second kind is better." She nodded seriously, processing this information with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "I like the second kind better too," she said. "That's the kind you give me?" That night, after Emma was asleep, I looked at her school photo again and made a promise. I would protect her from the conditional love that had shaped my childhood. I would ensure that her worth was never tied to her performance, that her value as a human being was never questioned or debated. Emma's brilliance was a gift, but it wasn't her identity. Her achievements were wonderful, but they weren't her worth. She was loved not because she was exceptional, but because she was mine, and that love would never depend on trophies, test scores, or anyone else's approval. The handwritten letter to my parents sits in my desk drawer, never sent but not forgotten. I wrote it during one of those sleepless nights when Emma's questions about family love kept echoing in my mind. 4 pages of everything I'd wanted to say for years, but never had the courage to voice. The confrontation came 3 weeks after. I'd established boundaries around Emma's relationship with my parents. They'd responded to my requests with increasingly passive-aggressive attempts to maintain access to their newly discovered granddaughter. Gifts arrived without occasion's expensive math sets, designer clothes, educational toys that screamed investment in a gifted child. I returned each package unopened. The breaking point came when I discovered they'd contacted Emma's school directly, inquiring about her academic progress and asking to be listed as emergency contacts. The school secretary, Mrs. Walsh, called to verify the relationship. "I'm sorry to bother you, Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "but we had a woman here yesterday claiming to be Emma's grandmother. She wanted copies of Emma's academic records and asked about our gifted program enrollment procedures." My mother had gone behind my back, treating Emma like a possession she had rights to rather than a child under my care. The violation felt complete and deliberate. I called and asked them to meet me at the park where Emma and I often played, neutral ground where I couldn't be overwhelmed by the familiar dynamics of their home territory. They arrived dressed as if for a business meeting, my father in his best suit, my mother carrying her purse like armor. "Sarah," my mother began before I could speak, "this has gone far enough. You're being unreasonable about Emma's relationship with her family." "Sit down," I said firmly, gesturing to the picnic table. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let them control the conversation. They sat reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with being directed by the daughter they'd spent years dismissing. "You went to Emma's school without my permission," I began. "You tried to access her records, insert yourselves into her educational decisions. That stops now. We have a right to know about our granddaughter's progress," my father said, using the same authoritative tone that had intimidated me as a child. "You have no rights here," I replied, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "You forfeited those rights when you walked away from her for the first 5 years of her life." My mother's composure cracked slightly. "We've explained that. We were concerned about your ability to provide for a child. You thought wrong." I pulled out my phone and showed them photos I'd been saving Emma at 6 months. Taking her first steps, reading her first book, solving her first complex equation. "This is what you missed. Not because you weren't invited, but because you chose not to be here." I swiped through image after image of milestones, achievements, ordinary moments that make up a childhood. Her first word was mama. She was walking by 10 months. She could count to 100 before she turned 2. She's had the flu 3 times, broke her arm on the playground when she was 4, and still sleeps with the stuffed rabbit Mrs. Chun gave her for her first birthday. My parents stared at the photos with something that might have been regret, but I wasn't finished. "You don't know her favorite color, her biggest fear, what makes her laugh. You don't know that she's afraid of thunderstorms but fascinated by lightning. You don't know that she saves half her allowance every week to buy books for kids whose families can't afford them. You don't know any of this because you never cared to learn." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We were protecting ourselves from getting attached to a situation that might not work out." "Protecting yourselves," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "From your own granddaughter. From loving a child who needed family." My father shifted uncomfortably. "You have to understand our position. You were young, unprepared. I was 24. Rebecca was 26 when she got married, and you threw her an engagement party for 100 people. But I was too young to be trusted with my own child." The comparison clearly stung because it was irrefutable. Rebecca's life choices had always been celebrated while mine were questioned. "This isn't about Rebecca," my mother said weakly. "It's always been about Rebecca." The words came out harder than I intended. Perfect Rebecca who followed your plan, married the right man, chose the right career. I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't be trusted to make good decisions. Even now, you're not interested in Emma because you love her. You're interested because she makes the family look good. "We want to support her education," my father insisted. "She has extraordinary gifts that deserve cultivation." "She has extraordinary gifts because she's been loved unconditionally, supported consistently, and given the freedom to explore without judgment." not because of your genes or your social connections. I stood up, pacing slightly as years of suppressed anger finally found their voice. Do you know what Emma asked me last week? She asked if I would still love her if she wasn't good at math. A 5-year-old shouldn't have to worry about conditional love, but she's already learned from you that affection depends on performance. My mother's face went pale. We never said anything like that to her. You didn't have to say it. Children understand emotional dynamics better than adults give them credit for. She knows you weren't interested in her until she won a trophy. She knows your pride in her is tied to her achievements, not her character. The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unspoken truths. What do you want from us? My father asked finally. I want you to decide if you can love Emma without conditions. If you can be present for the ordinary moments, not just the victories. If you can support her when she struggles, not just when she succeeds. If you can accept that she's a child who needs to play and make mistakes and sometimes fail at things. I pulled out the letter I'd written but never sent, the one that contained all the pain and hope I'd carried for years. I won't let you do to Emma what you did to me, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I won't let her grow up believing she has to earn love through performance. If you want to be her grandparents, you need to learn how to love unconditionally. If you can't do that, then it's better for everyone if you stay away. My mother was crying now, quiet tears that seemed to surprise her. My father stared at the letter in my hands, as if it might contain secrets he wasn't ready to hear. We love her, my mother whispered. Then prove it, I said. Love her on her worst day. Love her when she's tired and cranky and can't solve a simple addition problem. Love her when she wants to play with dolls instead of math books. Love her the way every child deserves to be loved completely and without reservation. I left them sitting at that picnic table, my letter still unread in my hands. The confrontation had been years in the making, and it felt both devastating and liberating. I'd finally said everything I'd needed to say. Finally stood up for both Emma and the little girl I used to be. Whether they could hear it, whether they could change, that was up to them. But Emma would never again have to wonder if her worth was tied to her achievements. Not on my watch. Emma's journal entry, written in her careful 5-year-old handwriting, broke my heart when I found it tucked between her math workbooks. My grandparents are nice, but they only want to talk about numbers. I wish they would ask me about my dreams or my favorite animals. Do they think I'm only good for being smart? I hadn't realized she'd been processing the family dynamics so deeply. Children see everything, understand more than we give them credit for, and Emma's emotional intelligence was as advanced as her mathematical abilities. The week after my confrontation with my parents had been blissfully quiet. No phone calls, no unexpected visits, no gifts arriving with strings attached. Emma and I had settled back into our comfortable routine of library visits, park adventures, and evening math sessions that felt like play rather than performance. But Emma's questions revealed how much the recent family drama had affected her. "Mommy," she said during breakfast one Tuesday morning, "did I do something wrong to make Grandma and Grandpa not want to see me before?" The innocence in her voice was devastating. How do you explain adult dysfunction to a child without damaging their faith in family, in love, in the basic goodness of people? "No, sweetheart," I said, sitting down beside her. "You never did anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes about what's important, but they seem to really like me now. What changed?" I struggled for an answer that would protect her innocence while honoring her intelligence. Sometimes people need help understanding how special someone is. The newspaper article helped them see what I've always known, that you're an amazing little girl. She considered this seriously, stirring her cereal in mathematical patterns while she thought. "But you knew I was special before I won the contest, right?" "I knew you were special the moment I first held you," I said truthfully. "Before you could walk or talk or solve any equations. You were perfect just because you were you. Relief flooded her face, and I realized she'd been carrying uncertainty about my love too. The family dynamics had made her question whether anyone's affection could be trusted. That afternoon, while Emma was having her quiet time, I found her journal open on her bed. Usually, I respected her privacy, but the visible words caught my attention. I love math, but I also love butterflies and stories and the way clouds look like animals sometimes. I hope mommy knows all the parts of me are important. Reading her words, I understood that Emma was grappling with identity in ways no 5-year-old should have to. She was already learning to compartmentalize herself, to present different versions of who she was to different people. When she woke up from her rest, I sat on her bed with the journal between us. I saw what you wrote, I said gently. Can we talk about it? She nodded, suddenly looking much older than her years. I know you love all parts of yourself, I continued. And I love all parts of you too. Your mathematical mind, your kind heart, your curiosity about everything, your sense of humor, the way you care about other people. You're not just one thing, Emma. You're wonderfully complex. But Grandma and Grandpa only seem interested in the math part, she said quietly. That's their limitation, not yours. Some people don't know how to appreciate the full picture of a person, but that doesn't mean you should hide parts of yourself to make them comfortable. We spent the evening doing decidedly non-mathematical activities. We baked cookies, read picture books, and built a fort out of blankets and pillows. Emma's laughter filled our small apartment, pure and unguarded, not tied to any achievement or expectation. As I tucked her into bed that night, she asked the question I'd been dreading, will Grandma and Grandpa ever want to see me again? The hope in her voice was heartbreaking. Despite everything, despite their absence from her life and their conditional interest, she still wanted their love. Children are naturally forgiving, naturally optimistic about family connections. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. That depends on whether they can learn to love you the way you deserve to be loved, completely and without conditions. What does that mean? It means loving you when you're happy and when you're sad, when you solve hard problems and when you can't figure something out, when you wanted to do math and when you want to play with toys, when you're being your best self and when you're having a difficult day. She nodded seriously, processing this. Definition of love. That's how you love me, she observed. That's how real love works, I confirmed over the following days. I watched Emma carefully for signs of damage from the recent family turmoil, but her resilience amazed me. She continued to approach her mathematical work with joy, not pressure. She played with neighborhood children without trying to impress them with her intellectual abilities. She remained curious, confident, and emotionally open. The difference, I realized, was that Emma had a foundation of unconditional love to fall back on. Unlike my childhood, where parental approval was always uncertain, Emma never doubted that. She was cherished exactly as she was. That security allowed her to weather the confusion of her grandparents, conditional interest without internalizing it as personal failure. But I also knew that children's resilience has limits. The longer Emma was exposed to conditional love, the more likely she was to begin questioning her own worth. My job was to protect her innocence while she was still young enough to be protected, to shield her from the toxic patterns that had shaped my own relationship with love and approval. That night, I wrote in my own journal, Emma's innocence is both precious and fragile. She still believes that love should be simple, generous, and unconditional. My job is to preserve that belief for as long as possible, to ensure that when she encounters conditional love in the world, she recognizes it as the exception rather than the rule. Her 5-year-old wisdom, the understanding that she was, more than her achievements, was already more advanced than most adults ever achieve. I was determined to nurture that wisdom, to help her grow into someone who would never sacrifice her authentic self for anyone else's approval. The family therapy brochure arrived in my mailbox 2 weeks after the confrontation, along with a handwritten note from my mother. "We've been thinking about what you said. We want to try." The gesture surprised me. My parents had always viewed therapy as weakness, something for other families with problems they couldn't solve privately. I'd learned not to trust grand gestures without sustained change. When my father called to discuss the therapy suggestion, I was cautiously optimistic but firm about my conditions. "If we're going to do this," I said, "it has to be real. Not performance therapy where everyone says the right words but nothing actually changes. And Emma doesn't participate until I'm convinced you've internalized some new patterns." "What do you mean by new patterns?" my father asked, his voice careful. "I mean, learning to love her when she's not performing. Learning to show interest in her as a person, not just as an achievement. Learning to be present for ordinary moments, not just victories." My mother's voice joined the call. "We understand that we've made mistakes." "This isn't about mistakes," I interrupted. "Mistakes are accidents. This is about choices. You chose not to be part of Emma's life until her achievements made you look good. That's not a mistake, that's a value system." The silence that followed was heavy with decades of unexamined assumptions. "We want to change," my father said finally. "Then prove it. Go to therapy. Do the work. Learn about emotional intelligence, about unconditional love, about what children actually need from grandparents. And don't expect access to Emma until you can demonstrate that you understand the difference between loving a person and loving their achievements." It was an ultimatum, and I delivered it without apology. Emma's emotional well-being was non-negotiable. I would not sacrifice her security for family peace or social appearances. Rebecca called that evening, predictably outraged. "You're being completely unreasonable," she said. "They're trying to make an effort, and you're treating them like criminals." "I'm protecting my daughter from conditional love," I replied. "Something I wish someone had done for me." "What's that supposed to mean?" The question revealed how little Rebecca understood about our family dynamics, how her position as the golden child had shielded her from the emotional manipulation I'd experienced. "It means I spent my entire childhood trying to earn love that should have been freely given. It means I was made to feel like a disappointment for not meeting standards that were never clearly defined. It means I will not allow Emma to grow up believing her worth depends on her performance." "You're being dramatic," Rebecca said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Tell me one time our parents expressed pride in me for something other than an achievement. Tell me one conversation where they asked about my happiness, my dreams, my emotional well-being." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of unacknowledged truths. "That's different," Rebecca said finally. "You were more challenging. I was a child who needed love." I cut her off. "Just like Emma is a child who needs love. The difference is that I'm not going to let her grow up thinking she has to earn it." 3 weeks later, my parents called to report on their first therapy session. My mother's voice was subdued, thoughtful in a way I'd rarely heard. The therapist asked us to describe Emma without mentioning any of her achievements. She said, "We couldn't do it, Sarah. We literally couldn't talk about our granddaughter without focusing on her intelligence." The admission was both heartbreaking and hopeful. At least they were beginning to recognize the pattern. "She also asked us about you," my father added, "about how we'd supported your dreams, your interests, your emotional development. We realized we couldn't answer those questions either." "What did you realize?" I asked, genuinely curious about their capacity for self-reflection. "That we've been loving ideas of people instead of actual people," my mother said slowly. "We loved the idea of having a brilliant granddaughter, but we didn't know anything about who Emma actually is as a person." It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard my mother say about relationships. "A therapist gave us homework," my father continued. We're supposed to practice talking about people, about you, about Emma, about each other without mentioning accomplishments or failures. Just focusing on character, personality, emotional qualities. How's that going? I asked. It's harder than it should be, my mother admitted. We've been measuring worth through achievement for so long that we don't know how else to see people. Over. The following month, they attended weekly sessions and called to update me on their progress. Slowly, their language began to change. Instead of asking about Emma's latest mathematical discoveries, they asked about her favorite games, her friends, her fears and hopes. We'd like to try again, my mother said during one of our conversations, but differently this time. Just spending time with Emma without any agenda except getting to know her. What would that look like? I asked. Maybe a simple afternoon at the park. No talk about school or achievements or potential. Just playing with our granddaughter. The suggestion was so different from their previous approach that I found myself willing to consider it, but I established clear boundaries. The visit would be short. I would be present the entire time, and any mention of Emma's intellectual abilities would end the visit immediately. We understand, my father said. We want to earn the right to be her grandparents, not just claim it. That phrase, earning the right to be her grandparents, represented a fundamental shift in their thinking. For the first time, they seemed to understand that family relationships require ongoing investment, not just biological connection. We'll try, I said. But Emma's emotional safety comes first, always. We wouldn't want it any other way, my mother replied, and for the first time in years, I almost believed her. The ultimatum had worked not because it forced compliance, but because it forced reflection. My parents were beginning to understand that love without conditions isn't weakness, it's strength. And that understanding, fragile as it was, offered the first real hope for healing our family had seen in years. Rebecca's graduation photo from Harvard Law School sits in a box in my closet now, but for years it held a place of honor on my parents' mantle, a shrine to acceptable achievement. I'd seen it countless times during family gatherings, a constant reminder of the golden child's success and my own comparative failure. But it was Rebecca's phone call 3 days after my parents' therapy breakthrough that finally shattered any illusions. I had about sisterly loyalty or family unity. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of barely controlled irritation. Can you meet me for coffee? We met at the same cafe where we'd had lunch after Emma's birth announcement years earlier, the last time we'd attempted any real conversation. Rebecca arrived perfectly put together as always, her designer suit and flawless makeup armor against any vulnerability. This therapy thing has gone too far, she said without preamble, not even ordering coffee before launching into her agenda. Mom called me crying yesterday. You're destroying this family with your unreasonable demands. I studied my sister's face, looking for any trace of the girl who used to build blanket forts with me, who had once promised we'd always be best friends. That girl was long gone, replaced by someone whose love was as conditional as our parents. I'm protecting my daughter, I said calmly, and trying to create healthier family dynamics by traumatizing our parents, by forcing them into therapy like they're criminals, by asking them to learn how to love without conditions. Something they never learned to do with us. Rebecca's laugh was bitter. There's nothing wrong with having standards, Sarah. There's nothing wrong with expecting excellence. There's everything wrong with making love conditional on meeting those standards. You've always been dramatic about this. Mom and Dad love us. They've always loved us. They're just not the type to coddle failure. The words hung between us, revealing everything about how Rebecca saw our childhood, our family, and ultimately, me. In her mind, I was the failure who needed coddling, and she was the success who'd earned unconditional love through achievement. Tell me about a time they comforted you when you were struggling, I said quietly. Tell me about a moment when they loved you through disappointment. Rebecca's confidence flickered for just a moment. They supported me when you succeeded. What about when you failed the bar exam the first time? What about when David broke up with you senior year? What about when you were struggling with anxiety in law school? Each question hit its mark because Rebecca's face grew more defensive with each one. I was naming the moments when she'd needed emotional support, not achievement-based approval. That's different, she said finally. I handled those things myself. I didn't need them to baby me through every setback. You didn't ask for help because you knew their love was conditional too, I said, finally understanding my sister's psychology. You learned early that showing vulnerability would disappoint them, so you perfected the image of someone who never needed anything from anyone. I don't need therapy insights from someone who couldn't finish college. Rebecca snapped, and there it was, the contempt she'd always carried for my choices, my struggles, my different path. I didn't finish college because I was raising a daughter, alone with no support from my family, I replied evenly. And that daughter is now more emotionally intelligent at 5 than either of us was at 25. Emma is brilliant, I'll give you that. Which is why she deserves better than being held back by your neuroses about family dynamics. The attack was so direct, so cruel, that it took my breath away. My own sister was suggesting that my protection of Emma's emotional well-being was somehow damaging to her. What do you mean by that? I mean, Emma could have opportunities you can't provide. Riverside Academy, summer programs at Harvard, connections in academic circles. But your paranoia about conditional love is going to limit her potential. Finally, I understood. This wasn't about family healing or Emma's well-being. This was about Rebecca's own image, her ability to claim the brilliant niece as a reflection of superior Mitchell family genetics. You want to be the aunt who helped shape a prodigy, I said. You want the credit without any of the actual relationship building. I want what's best for Emma. Unlike you, I'm not letting personal grudges interfere with her future. Personal grudges? I stood up, suddenly seeing our entire family dynamic with crystal clarity. This isn't about grudges, Rebecca. This is about you never questioning why you had to be perfect to earn love, and resenting anyone who suggests there might be a better way. I was never required to be perfect. Yes, you were. You just happened to be good at meeting their requirements, so you never felt the pain of conditional love. But it was conditional for you too, you just never tested the limits. Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you've spent your entire adult life maintaining the image that earned you family approval. I know that you can't imagine allowing Emma to simply be herself because you never had that freedom either. The truth was settling between us like a heavy curtain. Rebecca had been as trapped by her parents' conditional love as I had she'd just been more successful at meeting the conditions. Emma doesn't need to be protected from having standards, Rebecca said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. Emma needs to know she's loved whether she meets standards or not. She needs to know that her worth isn't tied to her performance. She needs what neither of us ever had, unconditional love. Rebecca gathered her purse, her professional composure returning like armor. You're making a mistake, Sarah. Don't let your own issues deprive Emma of opportunities. And don't let your own fear of examining our family dynamics hurt my daughter. I replied as I watched Rebecca walk away, her heels clicking across the cafe floor with determined precision. I realized our relationship had been as conditional as everything else in our family. She loved me when I was the struggling sister who made her look successful by comparison. But the moment I stopped playing that role, the moment I demanded healthier dynamics, she saw me as a threat. That evening, I removed Rebecca's graduation photo from Emma's room, where I'd kept it as inspiration for academic achievement. I realized I'd been perpetuating the same toxic patterns, holding up achievements as the highest form of success. Teaching Emma to aspire to external validation, true success wasn't Rebecca's corner office or prestigious career. True success was Emma's secure attachment, her emotional intelligence, her ability to love and be loved without conditions. My sister had chosen to remain trapped in our family's dysfunctional patterns. But I was choosing freedom for myself and for Emma, even if it meant standing alone. Emma's science fair project on mathematical patterns in nature sits in our hallway now, but I'll never forget the day it was displayed in her school's gymnasium alongside dozens of other student projects. It was supposed to be a celebration of learning, but it became the stage for a very public family confrontation. Emma had worked on her project for weeks, exploring how Fibonacci sequences appear in sunflower seeds, pinnacone spirals, and flower petals. Her research was thorough, her presentation clear, and her enthusiasm infectious. She'd practiced explaining her findings to me dozens of times, and I was bursting with pride over her curiosity and dedication. What I hadn't expected was for my parents to show up uninvited. They arrived as Emma was explaining her project to a small group of teachers and parents, her voice confident and her eyes bright with the joy of sharing something she'd discovered. I was standing nearby, taking photos and beaming at her natural presentation skills. "Excuse me," my mother's voice cut through Emma's explanation. "We're Emma's grandparents." The group turned, and I felt my stomach drop. Emma's face lit up with surprise and delight, but I could already see the shift happening, the way my parents positioned themselves, as if they belonged there, as if they'd been part of Emma's educational journey all along. "We're so proud of her work," my father announced to anyone who would listen. "She gets her mathematical mind from our side of the family." My father was an engineer, and my brother teaches at the university. I watched in growing alarm as they began taking over Emma's presentation, adding commentary about genetic predisposition and family intellectual history. Emma, naturally social and excited about the attention, didn't understand that she was being used as a prop. Actually, I interjected, stepping closer to Emma. "This project represents months of Emma's independent research and curiosity. She chose the topic herself and did all the work." My mother smiled, that polished social smile I knew so well. "Of course she did. We're just so pleased to see her gifts being recognized. We've been telling everyone about her mathematical achievements." The word "everyone" hung in the air like a challenge. They'd been claiming credit for Emma's success to their social circle, presenting themselves as involved grandparents despite their years of absence. Mrs. Chun, who had come to support Emma, caught my eye from across the room. Her expression was troubled. She understood the family dynamics better than most of the other parents. "Emma," I said gently, "why don't you tell Mrs. Rodriguez about how you discovered the Fibonacci pattern in our sunflower garden?" As Emma launched into her explanation, my parents continued their performance for the assembled adults. They dropped names of prestigious schools, mentioned trust funds for Emma's education, and generally created the impression that they were deeply involved in nurturing their granddaughter's talents. The breaking point came when a local reporter, covering the science fair for the community newsletter, approached our group. "I'd love to get a quote from the family about Emma's impressive project," she said, pulling out her notebook. Before I could respond, my father stepped forward. "We've always known Emma was special. We've been supporting her mathematical development since she was very young. It's wonderful to see our investment paying off." The lie was so blatant, so complete, that I felt something snap inside me. "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the nearby displays, "Emma's grandparents have been part of her life for exactly 6 weeks. Everything you see here, her confidence, her curiosity, her research skills, was developed during the 5 years they chose not to know her." The silence that followed was deafening. Other parents stopped their conversations, teachers paused their evaluations, and Emma looked up at me with confusion clouding her bright eyes. "Sarah," my mother said quietly, her social composure cracking, "this isn't the place. This is exactly the place," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Emma deserves credit for her own achievements. She deserves recognition for the work she's done, the curiosity she's nurtured, the confidence she's built through years of unconditional support. I turned to the reporter who was scribbling frantically in her notebook. Emma Mitchell is 5 years old, and she's been fascinated by mathematical patterns since she could walk. She's been supported every step of the way by her mother, her neighbors, her teachers, and her own brilliant mind. Her success isn't a family achievement, it's hers. Anna tugged on my sleeve, and I knelt down to her level. "Mommy," she whispered. "Are you angry?" "I'm not angry at you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. So very proud. But you're angry at Grandma and Grandpa?" The question was asked loudly enough for others to hear, and I realized Emma was processing the family dynamics in real time, trying to understand why her moment of triumph had become a battleground. "I'm upset that they're trying to take credit for your hard work," I said honestly. "You did this project. You made these discoveries. You deserve the recognition." My parents looked mortified, surrounded by other families who were clearly uncomfortable with the public family drama. But I was done protecting their image at the expense of Emma's truth. The reporter approached me directly. "Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell me about Emma's educational journey?" "Emma has been homeschooled in advanced mathematics since she was 3, I said. "She's attended every library program, participated in online math forums, and spent countless hours exploring mathematical concepts. She did the science fair project entirely on her own initiative, using resources we've gathered over years of supporting her interests." As I spoke, I saw recognition dawning in the faces of other parents and teachers. They understood what they were witnessing, the difference between earned pride and claimed credit. Emma's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, stepped forward. "I can confirm that Emma's project represents exceptional independent work. Her mother has been incredibly supportive of her mathematical interests throughout the school year." The validation felt overwhelming. For the first time, other adults were publicly acknowledging the reality of my parenting, the dedication I'd shown, the results I'd achieved despite my family's absence that my parents left shortly after, claiming they had other commitments. Emma watched them go with disappointment, but she was quickly distracted by other families wanting to hear about her project. The rest of the evening was magical. Emma explained her research to dozens of interested visitors, answered complex questions about mathematical concepts, and basked in genuine appreciation for her work. The difference between conditional pride and authentic recognition was visible in her face. This was celebration without strings attached. Driving home that night, Emma was quiet for a long time before asking, "Mommy, why did you get upset with Grandma and Grandpa?" "Because they were trying to take credit for something you did all by yourself. That's not fair to you." "But don't they love me?" The question broke my heart because it revealed how much Emma wanted their love, despite everything she'd witnessed. "They love the idea of having a brilliant granddaughter," I said carefully. "But real love means being there for all the ordinary moments too, not just the special ones. Like when you help me with homework, even when it's boring." "Exactly like that. And when you take care of me when I'm sick." "Yes, sweetheart. Real love shows up every day, not just for celebrations." Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing this distinction between performative love and authentic care. "I'm glad you stood up for me," she said finally, even though it made things uncomfortable. Her words surprised me with their maturity. At 5 years old, she already understood that sometimes protecting someone means accepting temporary discomfort. "You never have to let anyone take credit for your achievements," I told her. "And you never have to perform for love. Real love doesn't require a show." That night, after Emma was asleep, I reflected on what had happened at the science fair. Standing up to my parents publicly had felt both terrifying and liberating. For years, I protected their image at the cost of my own truth. But Emma deserved better than watching her mother hide from difficult conversations. The community response over the following days was overwhelming. Other parents reached out to express support. Teachers acknowledged the challenges of single motherhood, and Mrs. Chen brought over enough soup to last a week. "You did right thing," she told me simply. "Child needs to know mother will fight for her." Most importantly, Emma seemed to grow taller after that day. She carried herself with a new confidence, secure in the knowledge that her achievements were her own and that someone would always advocate for her truth. The science fair had become more than a celebration of learning. It was the moment I chose Emma's emotional well-being over family harmony, truth over social comfort, and authentic love over conditional approval. And watching Emma thrive in the aftermath, I knew I'd made the right choice. My college acceptance letter from years ago sits in the same box as Rebecca's graduation photo, but I pulled it out recently and realized it represents something different. Now, not a dream deferred, but a path reimagined. The letter, dated 8 years ago, had offered me a place in the graphic design program I'd always wanted to complete. I declined it when Emma was born, choosing motherhood over education. But watching Emma's confidence grow after the science fair incident, seeing how she thrived when her achievements were properly attributed to her own efforts, I began to understand something important about modeling strength versus modeling sacrifice. The revelation came during one of our evening conversations. Emma was working on a complex math problem, and I was sketching in the margins of my freelance work, something I'd been doing unconsciously for months. "Mommy," she said, looking up from her equations, "your drawings are really beautiful. Have you ever thought about going back to school for art?" The question caught me off guard. Here was my 5-year-old daughter, recognizing my artistic abilities and encouraging my dreams in a way my family never had. "I used to think about it," I said carefully. "But that was before you came along. Why can't you do both?" She asked with the logical directness that made her such a gifted mathematician. "I go to school and I'm your daughter. Why can't you go to school and be my mother?" The simplicity of her reasoning was startling. I'd been operating under the assumption that motherhood meant sacrificing personal dreams, but Emma was suggesting a different model, one where pursuing your own growth actually enhanced your ability to support someone else's. That night, after Emma was asleep, I found myself researching adult education programs, part-time degree options, online courses that could fit around my parenting responsibilities. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that included both successful motherhood and personal achievement. The practical challenges were significant. Childcare during evening classes, tuition costs on our tight budget, the time management required to balance education with freelance work and parenting. But as I worked through the logistics, I realized something profound. Emma's success had given me permission to want success for myself too. I'd spent so many years defining myself in opposition to my family's values, rejecting their emphasis on achievement, their focus on external validation, that I'd forgotten I could pursue my own goals without adopting their toxic approach to success. The difference was motivation. My parents had pushed achievement as a measure of worth. I could pursue education as a tool for growth, a way to model lifelong learning for Emma, and a path toward financial security that would benefit both of us. When I mentioned my interest in returning to school to Mrs. Chun, her face lit up with excitement. "About time," she said, nodding approvingly. "Smart woman should use her brain. Emma will be proud to have educated mother." Her matter-of-fact support was exactly what I needed. No complicated analysis of whether I deserved to pursue my dreams, no questioning of my priorities, just simple acknowledgement that personal growth was natural and valuable. The application process felt surreal after so many years away from academic environments. writing personal statements, gathering transcripts, explaining my educational gap. But instead of shame about the unconventional path, I felt pride in what I'd accomplished during those years away from formal education. Raising Emma had taught me project management, creative problem solving, budgeting, research skills, and emotional intelligence. Single motherhood had been its own intensive education in life, skills that many college graduates never develop. When I was accepted into the part-time graphic design program at the community college, Emma insisted we celebrate with ice cream and a trip to the art supply store. "Now we're both students," she said proudly, comparing her math workbooks to my design software manuals. The comparison delighted me because it revealed how she saw learning not as a burden or a performance requirement, but as an adventure we could share. My first semester was challenging in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not academically, my skills were solid and my motivation high, but emotionally. Sitting in classrooms with students barely out of high school, I sometimes felt ancient and out of place, but Emma's excitement about my homework assignments kept me grounded. She'd ask about my design projects with the same enthusiasm she brought to her mathematical discoveries. When I struggled with a particularly complex assignment, she'd sit beside me and work on her own projects, creating a shared study space that felt natural and supportive. "Look, Mommy," she said one evening, showing me a drawing she'd made while I worked on a typography project. "I used mathematical principles to make the spacing perfect, just like you're learning in your design class." The connection she drew between her mathematical thinking and my artistic education revealed something beautiful. We were learning different subjects, but approaching them with similar curiosity and dedication. 6 months into my program, I realized I'd found my voice in ways that extended far beyond academic work. Speaking up in class discussions, advocating for my design choices, presenting projects with confidence. These skills transferred directly to other areas of my life. When my parents called to check in, after months of silence following the science fair incident, I found myself responding differently than I ever had before. "We've been thinking about what you said," my mother began carefully. "Good," I replied simply, without rushing to fill the silence or smooth over the discomfort. "We'd like to try again with Emma if you're willing." "What would that look like?" I asked, using the same direct questioning I've learned in design critiques. For the first time in our relationship, I wasn't managing their emotions or protecting their image. I was simply asking for clarity about their intentions. The conversation that followed was different than any we'd ever had, more honest, less performative, focused on specific behavioral changes rather than vague promises. Finding my voice academically had taught me to find my voice personally. Pursuing my own dreams had shown me that self-advocacy wasn't selfish, it was necessary. And modeling personal growth for Emma was teaching her that women don't have to choose between nurturing others and developing themselves. As I worked on my final project for the semester, a visual identity for a fictional nonprofit supporting single mothers in education, I realized I was designing more than a class assignment. I was creating a symbol of the life I was building, one where personal achievement and devoted motherhood enhanced rather than competed with each other. Emma watched me present the project via video call from our kitchen table, and when I finished, she applauded with genuine enthusiasm. "I'm proud of you, Mommy," she said. "You're really good at following your dreams." In that moment, I understood that finding my voice hadn't just changed my relationship with my family or my career prospects. It had shown Emma what it looks like when a woman believes in her own worth, pursues her own goals, and refuses to shrink herself to fit others' expectations. The college acceptance letter in my box, no longer represented a path not taken. It represented a woman who had learned to trust her own timing, honor her own priorities, and create space for both love and ambition in her life. Emma's Mother's Day card from last spring sits framed on my dresser, its construction paper heart slightly lopsided but perfect in every way that matters. Inside, written in her careful 6-year-old handwriting, "Dear Mommy, you are the best. Mom, because you love me even when I'm grumpy, and you help me learn new things every day. You make me feel safe and happy. Love, Emma. Pure love. Unconditional appreciation." Everything my parents had never learned to give. The card had arrived on a Mother's Day that would become a turning point for our family. My parents had called that morning with what they described as their final offer, a reconciliation plan that involved Emma spending summers with them, enrollment in Riverside Academy, and a trust fund that would secure her educational future through graduate school. "We've done the therapy work you asked for," my mother said, her voice carrying the careful tone of someone who'd practiced this conversation. "We understand that we made mistakes, and we want to make up for lost time. We're prepared to make significant financial commitments to Emma's future," my father added, "but we need to know that you're willing to work with us." The offer was generous, more generous than I'd ever imagined they might be. The trust fund alone would eliminate every financial worry I'd had about Emma's education. Riverside Academy would provide opportunities I could never afford on my own, but as I listened to their proposal, something felt fundamentally unchanged. They were still approaching Emma as a project to be managed, an investment to be optimized, rather than a child to be loved. "What does working with you mean?" I asked. "It means recognizing that Emma needs structure, challenge, appropriate social connections," my mother explained. "It means not letting your personal issues with us interfere with her best interests." Personal issues, as if protecting Emma from conditional love was just my neurosis rather than responsible parenting. "Have you talked to Emma about what she wants?" I asked. The silence that followed was telling. "She's 6 years old," my father said finally. "She can't make decisions about her long-term educational needs." But they were wrong. Emma might not understand trust funds or academic trajectories, but she understood love, security, and what made her feel valued as a person versus what made her feel like a performance. That afternoon, Emma and I had one of our long talks while she worked on an art project, a painting of our small apartment that she'd titled Home. "Grandma and Grandpa want to help pay for a fancy school," I told her carefully. "What do you think about that?" Emma considered the question seriously, her brush poised over her painting. "Would I still live with you?" she asked. "During the school year, yes, but they'd like you to spend summers with them." "What would we do during summers?" "I'm not sure. Probably educational programs, math camps, activities to develop your abilities." She nodded thoughtfully, then continued painting her tiny kitchen with careful attention to detail. "Do you want to go to the fancy school?" I asked. "I liked my school. Now," she said, "Ms. Rodriguez understands when I need harder math problems, and I have friends who like me even when I'm not doing math." "And what about spending summers with Grandma and Grandpa?" Emma set down her brush and looked at me with those serious dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "Would you be lonely without me?" The question revealed her emotional intelligence. She understood that choices affect multiple people, that love involves considering others' needs. "I would miss you terribly," I said honestly. "But if you wanted to go, we'd figure out how to make it work." "I don't want to go," she said simply. "I want to stay here with you and keep learning things together. Maybe Grandma and Grandpa could visit sometimes instead." That evening, I called my parents back with Emma's decision. "She's too young to understand what she's turning down," my mother protested. "She's old enough to understand what feels safe and what doesn't," I replied. "And she's smart enough to know the difference between love and opportunity." "You're making a mistake, Sarah," my father said. "This kind of financial support won't be offered again." "Then you never understood what Emma needs," I said, finally realizing the truth that had been building for months. She doesn't need your money or your connections or your social advantages. She needs adults who love her unconditionally, who support her dreams without trying to direct them, who value her happiness as much as her achievements. The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. My parents outlined everything Emma would be losing by staying with me: prestigious education, financial security, social connections, academic advantages. I outlined everything she would be keeping: emotional security, unconditional love, the freedom to grow at her own pace, the knowledge that her worth wasn't tied to her performance. "We can't keep doing this," my mother said finally. "We can't keep begging for access to our granddaughter." "You're not begging for access," I said gently. "You're demanding control." "There's a difference." The silence that followed felt final, heavy with years of accumulated misunderstanding and hurt. "If you change your mind," my father began. "I won't," I said. "Emma's emotional well-being isn't negotiable. If you want to be part of her life, you'll have to learn to love her without conditions, without agendas, without trying to shape her into someone who makes you look good." After I hung up, Emma appeared in the doorway, having overheard parts of the conversation. "Are Grandma and Grandpa sad?" she asked. "They're disappointed," I said. "But sometimes people have to be disappointed when they can't have what they want the way they want it. Do you think they'll ever learn to love like you do?" The question broke my heart because it revealed how clearly Emma understood the difference between conditional and unconditional love, despite being only 6 years old. "I hope so," I said. "But even if they don't, you'll always know what real love feels like." She climbed onto my lap and we sat together looking at her painting of our home, small, cramped, financially struggling, but filled with the kind of love that doesn't keep score. "I'm glad we chose each other," she said, and I realized she was right. We had chosen each other not just when I decided to keep her as an unplanned pregnancy, but every day since then when we prioritized love over convenience, emotional health over social approval, authenticity over performance. The final choice hadn't been about rejecting my parents' offer. It had been about choosing the kind of family we wanted to be, one where love was given freely, where worth wasn't earned through achievement, where a child could grow up knowing she was valued for who she was, not what she could do. That night, I tucked Emma's Mother's Day card back into its frame and understood that we'd built something precious together. Not the kind of family that looked impressive from the outside, but the kind that felt safe and genuine from within. Sometimes the most loving choice is the one that protects what you've already built, rather than risking it for what others promise to give you. My graduation cap sits on Emma's bookshelf now, right next to her mathematics trophies and art projects, a symbol of dreams fulfilled rather than dreams deferred. At 34, I walked across that community college stage with Emma cheering. From the audience, both of us understanding that education is a journey that can begin at any age when the timing is right. The 2 years since my parents' final ultimatum have been the most peaceful of my adult life. Emma, now 7, continues to thrive academically and emotionally, but more importantly, she's growing up with an unshakable sense of her own worth. She knows she's loved not for what she achieves, but for who she has taught our chosen family has expanded. In beautiful ways, Mrs. Chun has become the grandmother. Emma deserves the one who celebrates her mathematical discoveries and her scraped knees with equal enthusiasm. My study group from college has become a network of supportive women who understand the challenges of pursuing dreams while raising children. Emma's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, continues to nurture her intellectual gifts while ensuring she remains grounded in childhood joy. The freelance graphic design business I built during my studies has grown into something sustainable and fulfilling. I work with small nonprofits and local businesses, creating visual identities for organizations that prioritize community over profit. It's meaningful work that pays well enough to provide security for Emma and me while allowing flexibility for School events and sick days. Emma's mathematical abilities continue to develop, but now they're balanced with art classes, soccer practice, and plenty of unstructured playtime. She's learned to paint watercolor landscapes and solve calculus problems with equal enthusiasm. When people comment on her intellectual gifts, she responds with confidence but not arrogance. I like math, but I like lots of other things too. The contrast with my own childhood couldn't be more stark. Where I grew up believing that love was earned through achievement, Emma is growing up knowing that love is simply given. Where I learned to hide my struggles and doubts, Emma talks openly about challenges and knows she'll be supported through them. 3 months ago, my mother called the first contact we'd had since the final ultimatum conversation. Her voice was different, smaller somehow, lacking the authoritative tone I'd grown up fearing. I've been thinking about what you said, she began carefully, about learning to love without conditions. I waited, no longer feeling the need to fill uncomfortable silences or manage her emotions. I wonder if, she paused, clearly struggling with unfamiliar vulnerability. I wonder if you might be willing to meet for coffee. Just the two of us. No agendas about Emma, no demands about family relationships. I think I need to understand some things about myself, about how I've loved people. The request surprised me with its humility. For the first time in my memory, my mother was asking for something without offering conditions or ultimatums in return. We met at the same cafe where Rebecca had confronted me 2 years earlier, but this conversation felt entirely different. My mother looked older, more fragile, but also more genuine than I'd seen her before. The therapy helped me understand some things, she said, stirring her coffee with nervous energy, about how I was raised, about the mistakes I made with you, and Rebecca, about the difference between loving someone and loving what they represent. She talked about her own childhood, about parents who'd shown love through achievement and withheld it during struggles. She talked about learning to perform rather than feel, to achieve rather than connect. She talked about recognizing these patterns in her relationship with Rebecca and me, and the devastating realization that she'd never learned to love without keeping score. I don't know if I can change completely, she said honestly, but I want to try. Not because I expect forgiveness or access to Emma, but because I want to understand what real love looks like. The conversation lasted 3 hours, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw my mother as a person rather than just a parent, someone shaped by her own wounds, limited by her own upbringing, capable of growth even in her 70s. I didn't make any promises about reconciliation or family relationships, but I agreed to continue the conversations, to explore whether healing was possible between two people who'd hurt each other. Through years of conditional love and emotional distance, Emma knows about these coffee meetings with her grandmother, and she's curious but not anxious about them. She trusts my judgment about family safety in ways that still amaze me. When I ask if she'd like to see my mother again someday, she considers the question seriously. Maybe when she learns to love without trying to change people, she says with 7-year-old wisdom, I don't want to have to pretend to be different than I am. Her clarity about emotional boundaries at such a young age gives me hope that she navigate relationships throughout her life from a position of strength rather than need. She's learning to recognize healthy love, not because she's been hurt by unhealthy love, but because she's been consistently shown what real love looks like. Last week, Emma brought home a school assignment about family traditions. Instead of writing about holiday celebrations or cultural practices, she wrote about our Sunday morning conversations, the time we spend each week talking about anything that's on her mind, sharing our hopes and worries, planning adventures, or simply enjoying each other's company. My mom and I have talking time every Sunday, she wrote. We tell each other about our feelings and dreams. My mom listens to everything they say and never makes me feel bad for thinking different things. This is my favorite tradition because it makes me feel safe and loved. Reading her words, I realized we'd created something neither of us had inherited, a family culture based on emotional safety, authentic connection, and unconditional love. It's not the family I was born into, but it's the family we've chosen to become. The graduation cap on Emma's shelf represents more than academic achievement. It represents second chances, the courage to pursue dreams despite obstacles, and the understanding that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. It represents a mother who refused to sacrifice her own growth, and a daughter who's learning that pursuing your dreams doesn't require abandoning the people you love. Tomorrow, Emma and I are starting a new tradition volunteering at the Literacy Center where I'll use my design skills to create educational materials while she helps younger children with reading. We're building a life that extends beyond our small apartment, creating connections with people who value kindness over achievement, growth over performance. As I watch Emma work on her latest mathematical discovery, an exploration of geometric patterns in music, I see not just a brilliant child, but a secure human being who knows her worth isn't tied to her accomplishments. She pursues excellence because it brings her joy, not because it earns her love. The daughter my parents were ashamed of has raised a granddaughter who would make anyone proud, not because of her achievements, but because of her character, her confidence, and her capacity for love. She's growing up knowing that real success isn't measured by trophies or test scores, but by the strength of your relationships, the authenticity of your choices, and the courage to love without keeping score. We've broken the cycle of conditional love that defined my family for generations. Emma will grow up believing that love is abundant, freely given, and never dependent on performance. And that belief will shape not just her childhood, but the way she loves others throughout her entire life. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child isn't privilege or opportunity or social advantage. Sometimes it's simply the unshakable knowledge that they are worthy of love exactly as they are. Everything else, including brilliance, is just beautiful addition to that foundation.